All right, so it'll take just a second for us to get this all set up, but just so you know, you're going to be recorded and on YouTube. So that's now part of our process.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Disney World 2002.
No, it's not. I'll do like I did last time. There won't be a YouTube.
Why are we having the problem?
Because it's not signed in over here.
What's keeping us from signing in?
I don't know all the information. So we won't YouTube it, but we have it for Zoom and
Did
I
we
can
just
just
lose
do
the
it.
meeting?
We're fine.
All right, so we'll start this meeting. It's 1:05. We've got Laura here and Mark here. We're at some point hoping that we will also see Mike. So there's a couple of things we want to do in keeping with our discussions in the past about having these meetings regularly, even if we don't have a loan to consider. So you can consider this our first quarterly meeting for 2022. We wanted to share 3 or 4 key areas with you guys and also just to make them part of the process. So the first thing is we've provided you with the current status of the loan portfolio. As Laura was noting, there's a couple of loans that have been paid, perhaps since the last time we spoke, Barking Spider most recently. But as you can see that the portfolio continues to shrink in terms of what's active simply because we either have entities that are in some form of settlement or bankruptcy, or we have, loans that are performing. So I wanted to find out if you guys had any questions. There's been no new activity here, but is there anything on this loan portfolio that you either have a question about or you want to talk about?
I do not.
Laura?
no. Nice
All
to
right.
see the update. A couple of years.
All right. I wanted to bring you up to date on the fact that we're having discussions in the LDC about a number of potential additional areas of, I guess you consider it investment. The LDC has roughly $1 million of assets that are currently not committed. There are several ideas that are in discussion, and I wanted to make sure you were aware of that, and also not only take any input that you have now, but be prepared to take any input that you have about that over time. Perhaps the one that's furthest along is the idea of either Warren County or a regional land bank. Craig Leggett, who's on the LDC board, and I have both been participating in a series of conversations about the potential of developing land banks. There, by New York state legislation, there are a finite number that can be established. I believe that there are 9 that slots essentially available to register with the state. So there's been a fair amount, given the housing crisis across the state, there's been a fair amount of interest. And so we've participated in a series of conversations with entities that have already established them or entities that support them from the state. I believe there is still discussion going on about the development of a regional land bank. Perhaps the most notable of the land banks that operate that way is the Mohawk Valley. They have a regional land bank that has responsibility for parts of 7 counties. But the vast majority of the land banks are operated by either a municipality or a county. The most aggressive that we've seen is Syracuse, Onondaga County. They're now approaching 2,500 properties that they've processed through the land bank over their history. That's a significant volume. There are land banks in the Capital District that also do a brisk volume, although nothing like that. You guys know when I talk about a land bank, what I'm referring to, or am I boring you if I tell you that?
So I'd love a little.
I'd like the context.
So
Yeah, same here.
So a land bank is essentially another vehicle by which a municipality can secure property. And it's the way I explain it to people is, I mean, eminent domain always exists for a municipality. They can choose to go through eminent domain proceedings, but in between eminent domain and the marketplace is a fair amount of space. So, in the marketplace, if a property is abandoned and goes on tax auction, there's already a market for people, developers or individuals to come in, purchase that property, rehabilitate that, attempt to make a return on that. That tends to happen in particularly urban or at least developed areas much more than it does in rural areas. And it also tends to be somewhat ebb and flow based on the heat of the housing market. So there are high friction properties, particularly in rural areas where there's an obstacle to overcome. Could be environmental, could be zoning, could be the amount of work that it's going to require in order to rehabilitate the property, but they attract no interest from the private sector. And so they sit oftentimes for years. We drive by them all the time. Properties that are essentially unproductive, but that the perceived cost of even buying them at a steep discount and then rehabilitating them against the market return is significant. This is where a land bank operates. So the land bank is essentially a public entity that provides somewhat of a subsidy by taking that property and rehabilitating it to market standards. And with the interest of trying to increase housing stock or housing availability.
I have an understanding of a land bank actually that I want to know if I'm right or wrong because I'm not sure if it really fits that. But could the city of Glens Falls declare itself a land bank, declare all the land in Glens Falls a land bank, and then when a property is zombie or whatever available, that property under the land bank is a nonprofit, so they can therefore put restrictions on who can buy the house, like they could restrict it to.
Well, let's take it one piece at a time. The city would not declare themselves or the area as a land bank. The city would apply to become a land bank, would have to be certified by the
Sure,
legislature, and an independent organization would have to administer it. And this is one of the hurdles, is that you got to go essentially put a paid staff in place to oversee the process, and there's overhead associated with it as part of the subsidy. That's why a regional effort in rural areas sometimes is a better model. Second piece is, no, you cannot restrict land usage simply because you're a land bank. So you are still subject to the same fair housing standards that anyone else would be.
Sure, but if you got a grant from, say, VHC to help build a house or rehab a house, then that would put a restriction on the house to be.
Okay, but the land bank wouldn't of itself. It would only be whether or not that was procured by whoever it is that has that grant. So I don't want to go too deep into this. The point is that the LDC is considering whether or not it would act as the financial seed funds for a potential land bank, and also whether or not it has any appetite for taking on the administrative responsibilities, whether or not it would advocate to do that regionally or only at a county level. All those conversations are going on. I simply want to alert you to it. If you'd like to participate or have questions or want to talk about that some more, you're welcome to contact us individually. But at some point, if the LDC decides that this is some place that they want to consider investing, this would be something we would want your input on, in terms of whether or not the structures that we're contemplating make sense from a commercial lending perspective or from a commercial activity perspective. So I just didn't want that to come out of the blue. It's likely at some point this year, you will be asked for your opinion about this. Second area is a lot of conversation around potentially developing a fund that would assist developers by creating some kind of match or subsidy against their pre-development costs. So in discussions with developers, it's become clear that in areas like ours, because of the scale of what is practical here, it makes more sense for a developer to go develop in, say, Colony, because there's far more demand. They can build a larger development than there is here. In order to try to entice developers to proactively propose developments, the idea was we would create a fund that would help carry some of those costs so that they're not 100% at risk. So as an example, if we want to try to entice development in Warrensburg, but the developers that do that work are south of here and have a lot of potential available to them in the capital district, that we might want to try to figure out how we're signaling to them that, number one, we're serious about the development, and number two, we would try to make that development either less risky or less costly, at least on the front end. So that conversation is occurring. Looks like Mark, you had something you want to add.
Yeah, are both of these conversations focused towards residential, or are these commercial developments, commercial land banks? I was on mute when I was trying to talk about that too.
They're neither. They're focused at trying to address the gap in housing stock, so that no one has limited them to one sector or the other. But okay, I'll tell you that their greatest utility is in attracting larger scale developers for mixed use developments. In both cases. Now, on the land bank side, you'd wind up rehabilitating individual homes more than you would putting in full developments. But the goal is to increase in step functions the amount of housing stock that's available in a variety of categories, whether it's affordable housing, workforce housing, transitional housing, or market-based housing.
So we've had some experience with the Albany Land Bank around, what is it, Henry Johnson Boulevard, and that situation down and through there, and it always just seems like we can never get past the hurdle of just trying to get something done for those houses down there. So I was wondering if the idea is very similar up here. It sounds like it's kind of a little bit of both. That's primarily focused on redevelopment of those homes.
Yeah, and the city of Glens Falls has already collaborated with Habitat on a zombie home program. And so that in the city itself, there's some of this activity that is not waiting for the establishment of a land bank. The city's already put up some funds that would essentially make the Habitat model less risky in terms of their upfront capital costs to transition, to essentially rehabilitate and transition these homes back into stock. So I think this is largely focused at the rest of the county, where again, this gets harder. You're talking about an individual home that's in the corridor between Thurman and Warrensburg. It's got a limited market. There's not that many people that are interested in doing that kind of work. And so that's really where the utility of a countywide land bank would come into play. The third one I wanted to mention, and I don't have very much detail on it, it only came up in the last meeting, is the potential of establishing a housing trust, which is another way of essentially taking title, doing land acquisition or housing acquisition. We still have some work to develop, but the point is that there is great appetite amongst the existing LDC community, and I think the larger community, to try to expand the LDC as is appropriate. It has to be legal and consistent with its charter and its, it's essentially it's both its mission and the legislation that guides it. But I believe that the LDC was originally constructed with community block grants that were specifically for housing. And the mission statement says this, and as recently as last year, there were continuing to be housing related expenses that were flowing through the LDC. So I don't believe there's any question about whether or not it's in or out of scope. It's simply a matter of, is this $1 million or some portion of it well used to start to apply as seed funds for any of these efforts?
Sorry,
Sorry, my watch just decided they didn't understand what I was saying.
Jim,
I only wanted to alert you of that. Go ahead, Laura.
so is this all grant money, or do they ultimately recover when the properties are rehabbed and sold, so the fund gets more money back into it and it's perpetuous, or is it a one-way?
Well, we don't know, but theoretically, it could be either. I mean, that has a lot to do with the construct of what we build. But for instance, in the case of a land bank, it is designed to essentially become, whatever proceeds are generated get reinvested in the land bank itself, almost like a revolving loan fund. So any positive returns essentially just become additional funds available to the land bank. Now, on the pre-development funding, there are models that essentially try to recapture those funds so that if a development were to move forward and somebody had been fronted some amount of money for their pre-development costs, that would essentially be applied in some way to some of their costs going forward. In that way, some of it might or might not be recaptured, but all of this is premature to talk about because no specific model has actually been proposed. That's the kind of stuff we would seek your kind of thoughts and input on before we did it. I wanted to show you guys, going on to the next topic, because I know we gotta go. I wanted to show you what the state controller's report says relative to the what we're calling the financial review committee or banking review. What are we calling it?
Business
Review Committee. So scroll down. Keep going. All right, right there. If you look at paragraph 3, this is the paragraph that we filed with our corrective action plan to the state that says that the Business Review Committee, which is you, will notify the public of its meetings. And it also specifies that whenever we discuss any particular application where there is non-disclosable information, that we would do that in executive or private session. So we would essentially step away from public visibility of that portion of what we do. But for instance, today's meeting was noticed and any member of the public can witness what we're talking about now because there is no proprietary or non-disclosable information being discussed. Just wanted to make sure you saw this. And if any of you want to go in greater depth, you can reach out to us. In addition, if we scroll down just a little further, I think 4 and 5 basically say that all loan application fees will be provided to you before a loan is reviewed, which means I'll never bring anything to you unless the loan application fee has been collected. I don't know that that's any different than what you would have wanted in the past, but we've committed to that here in the plan. We also say that no loan application that is incomplete will be forwarded to you. I think what happened was in the 20-year history of the LDC, the state was able to find, I don't know that they found any examples of this. They weren't necessarily able to find examples where we did do this for 100% of the applications. And so they asked us to reaffirm our commitment to these things, but this is just prudent. We wouldn't ask you to look at a loan that they hadn't paid their fee and they didn't have all the information. Any questions about any of this?
No.
Laura?
I agree.
And I think, did we?
Yeah, we have Mike.
Mike joined too.
Yeah, I'm on
Okay.
too. I agree.
I think
All right.
that historically, if memory serves, the reason that we didn't have all those complete packets was they were trying to bring anything that was remotely viable into the program at some level. Not necessarily smart, but I think that that's why it was probably done that way, because they were definitely having a hard time always getting complete loan packets for us.
Yeah. So going forward, Deanne, who you see here right next to me, I'm not sure you guys have ever been formally introduced, but Deanne is our new finance manager and compliance director here, and also has that same role with the LDC. So Deanne will assist Linda and I in making sure that we adhere to these, they're not really changes, it's just make sure we follow our process. I did want to, while we had you guys here, I wanted to ask you, because we sent you, by the way, all of the current information associated with our current policy guidelines on loans. this is a question that Travis and others have raised on the board of the LDC, which is, do we have greater insight to what is the appropriate interest rates, or are we going to continue to do this on a case-by-case basis? Because the current policy guidance allows for a fairly wide swath of potential interest rates. And one of the things that I was asked to do was to engage you to find out if there's significant change in the what we might call emerging post-pandemic world for either adjusting those rates up or down, or if we're still in a mode where we're not quite sure what's the right thing.
So I can tell you this, rates are driving up quickly, at least for us. And it would appear that over the next 2 to 4 Fed meetings, we could see interest rates jump 2 points, 2 basis points, or 200 basis points. So we are definitely in a rising rate environment that's changing by the second, it seems. So I continue to think that it's a case-by-case basis to best fit, but I could be in the minority on that. I could be talked the other way probably as well.
I think as long as we keep the rate at some reasonable spread over Wall Street Journal Prime, we're fine. The banks are going to be, right now, Wall Street Journal Prime at 3.5, we're probably going to be in the low to mid 4s. So if we're 2.5, 3% over that, that's reasonable for us for this program.
So this is what I've been telling the LDC board, which is that our goal, at least initially, was to create a secondary fund that would accept somewhat greater risk and would operate at a premium. I keep trying to remind them, because you have to remember that most of them are political figures. The object is not to create a loan subsidy, but to create a secondary loan pool that would allow applicants that are not commercially lendable to still have an opportunity to access capital. Is that something that you believe is still a true statement?
Yes.
That's my understanding.
And Mike?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things that is clearly happening is that the existing COVID relief funds and what I would consider to be kind of almost codependence on grants versus loans is quickly coming to an end. There was a recent release of several $100 million. That's what I consider to be the last gasp of COVID-related relief that had some grant aspect to it. It's not clear to me that we've had very many local applicants to it, because I think it was oversubscribed at the time of its announcement. Are you seeing any of this activity? Are you aware of any of this activity at any of your financial institutions or any of your clients?
No, so we're not seeing action on that. We're seeing heavy loan volume, but we're not seeing any action on those items.
Right now, we're seeing mostly action, retroactive ERC, which is huge dollars, but not anything grant-wise.
Yeah, we're the same.
So essentially what I'm envisioning is that by the back end of this year, there will be what I would consider to be more traditional demand for the services we provide. Because anybody who's sitting on the sidelines right now trying to figure out is going to come to you trying to get in as the rates are rising, realizing that they don't want to wait any longer. And to the extent that they're not commercially viable, or that the full amount is not commercially viable, they'll start to reach out to us as a secondary vehicle. So I'm expecting, not significant, but modest loan application volume in the second, third, and fourth quarter of this year. I just offer that to you because I actually think we are going to bring you some loan applications. We have 2 or 3 of them out now for at least initial work. Now, unfortunately, one of them was co-opted because they didn't recent public auction that would have been the basis of their loan. But the others, I believe, are still viable, and it's simply a matter of timing and their ability to organize themselves in time.
Fantastic.
All right, well, my goal is to keep you informed. We will probably, before our next meeting, we will probably have more dialogue about the land bank and some of these other potential issues. So we will try to communicate that to you in writing. You're certainly welcome to call any of us at any time if you want to talk about this or have greater questions, but month to month, we'll try to keep you informed so that nothing takes you by surprise about the fact that, oh my gosh, I woke up today and I realized that the LDC doesn't just have a loan portfolio, it now is, deeply into the real estate world. Nothing should catch you off guard though, because we don't move fast. It'll take us the rest of the year to put any of this in place.
It's true.
Yeah. Hey, could I just ask if we're gonna officially have these quarterly, can we schedule them out sooner rather than later so we can get them on our calendars, and
Yeah.
that'll help
Yeah.
us be able to commit to the full time.
Yes, and
I agree.
I want to take responsibility for that. I realized too late that we hadn't scheduled one for the first quarter, and so I shoved it in. But normally I would not ask you to do that. And yes, we will set up a proposed agenda schedule for the rest of the year and send that out to you.
Great, thank you.
Anything from the three of you before we go?
Where are those applicants being sourced from? Are they finding you? They coming in?
Yeah.
Are you attracting them? Are they coming through banks?
No, it's every single one of them wandered into the office. So I think essentially I've been hesitant to go out and market us until I felt like it was a productive use of our, energy and money.
Yeah.
When the Lake Champlain Planning Board still has money at 1.9%, we're just not competitive. And oftentimes the criteria is very similar. So as she exhausts those funds, it seemed logical to me to wait. Now, I'm not trying to compete with her. I'm not trying to beat somebody, get them to come to us instead of there. But, Travis gets mad at me about this because, his view is, why aren't we more actively marketing it? And right now, I don't know that it's in the interest of an applicant. So if somebody wanders in here, I tell them, here's everything that's available to you. And the rational thing would be for them to go seek a lower interest rate rather than what we would likely offer. But I expect, first of all, her funds do expire this year.
Okay.
And second of all, at some point, she just chews through them all. So that's when I think we're going to see the opportunity. And that's when we will go more actively market, and you'll start to see it. In fact, we may talk to you guys about how to do that in concert with each one of your banks. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I appreciate you guys giving us a half hour on short notice. We will continue to talk, and we value your contribution. It's going to be hopefully a worthy use of your time this year. So thanks for sticking it out with us.
Very good, thanks. Have a nice
Thanks,
weekend.
Mike.
Bye. You too.
Bye, guys.
All right, bye.
Bye.